DevilNeverCry.
Would you believe it that internet speculation and rumors actually came true for once? And might I add, what an absolutely fantastic trailer that was. Look, I'm the first to admit that I am a skeptic when it comes to games being shown at showcases, but boy am I glad that this rumor finally came true. And might I add, the one thing that I wanted, which was an extended look at gameplay, was actually included in this trailer. Might I also add that this game is actually coming on 2 discs. I literally can't remember the last time that I played or even purchased a game that came on 2 discs. Likely something in the PS2 era, obviously it was quite rampant in the PS1 era, but needless to say, it's been literal decades since a mainstream AAA game has come on more than just 1 disc. Beyond just that, however, we now also have a more accurate release window for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, considering most of us had pondered whether or not this would slip into 2024, that has now been confirmed. With Final Fantasy XVI literally just around the corner and a few other great titles already releasing at the tail end of 2023, I think I can safely say that I can keep myself busy until Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is ready. Moving on from that, let's talk about the trailer and what exactly it was that we just saw. Starting with the fact that in absolute Square Enix fashion, this trailer ended up posing more questions than it answered. That opening sequence of everybody being on the stretchers, wounded, weak, and barely lucid, makes as little sense to a newcomer to the series as to someone that's played the original Final Fantasy VII. I imagine just like Final Fantasy VII Remake, fiddling with fate and changing or altering timelines is going to play a big role in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. As we see the main party delve into the open world, there's a few things that are worth picking up on. The first of which is that Red 13 is actually a fully playable member of the party in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. He did make an appearance at the tail end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, but he wasn't fully controllable, or he wasn't actually controllable at all. We also have confirmation that Chocobos return. Of course, it wouldn't be Final Fantasy without Chocobos, as we get a look at the Chocobo farm, and we see the party on Chocobos riding around what I believe to be the world map. We also get a glimpse at the new Turk Elena, a character who I believe wasn't actually in the original Final Fantasy VII, but was included as part of the overall Final Fantasy VII compilation. What role she and the Turks will play, and how far that role will go in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, is something that's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Speaking of the cast, however, Yuffie also makes a return and is confirmed to be part of the team. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Yuffie of course was an entirely optional party member that you could choose not to recruit, specifically if you didn't want to go through the whole materia theft side quest, but she seems to be part of the team here. Considering how focused FF7 Intergrade was on her character, I think it's safe to say that they're not going to leave her as an optional party member in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and just make her a mainstay of the team. Looking at how Yuffie was handled, it also calls into question what exactly they're going to do with Vincent, the other optional member of the team from Final Fantasy VII. Perhaps they'll do what they did with Intergrade, where they'll focus a piece of DLC around Vincent and then have him be a mandatory party member in the 3rd part of the remake trilogy. Not wanting to get too ahead of myself here, perhaps that's a discussion that's better left for another day. Moving on to what else we can see in this trailer though, you can see the striking silhouette of Junon looming over the background here, this piece of gameplay, which makes sense considering that quite soon after the world opens up in Final Fantasy VII, the team are directed over to Junon Harbor. Jumping away from the locations for a second though, let's talk about the combat that we saw. It seems as though they're taking a lot of parts from Final Fantasy VII Intergrade, specifically the synergizing of combo attacks between party members, and of course implementing that here in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. At specific moments you can see team members collaborate to deal what feels like a finishing blow to an enemy, complete with a fantastically stylish animation. If there was one feature that I wanted them to take from Intergrade and introduce into Rebirth, it definitely was this, and so I'm glad that it's not just Yuffie that has access to this ability and that it's shared throughout the entirety of the party. The game's user interface, or the UI, looks nigh on similar or identical to what it was in Final Fantasy VII Remake, of course keeping things on brand and quite easy to read. But you can see that just under the ATB, or the Active Time Battle Bar, that there are small segments here that seem to be filled up and empty at times that weren't present in the original or in Intergrade. What exactly their function is, I'm unsure of, but I'm interested in seeing just how far this game's combat diversifies from that of the original. Shifting away from the gameplay and coming back to the story, of course, we also got a look at Cosmo Canyon and the gorgeous planetarium, specifically that scene where Bugenhagen talks the entirety of the party through the planet and the life stream and the Cetra, of course, and the Promised Land. Again, another scene that happens shortly after you leave Midgar. Looming over in the background of all of this footage is a pretty important conversation that seems to be taking place between, I believe, Tifa and Aerith, where Tifa's discussing the Nibelheim incident, which for those of you that have played the original Final Fantasy VII or who have played Crisis Core will know exactly what incident this is. This is what set Sephiroth off in motion, where he learns the truth and eventually leads on to the events of Final Fantasy VII. I do remember in the original Final Fantasy VII that the team kind of put off these kind of conversations until it eventually comes to a head where they literally have to put Cloud's broken mind back together and help him reconcile with the truth of the events. And so I'm struggling to place where exactly this conversation might actually be happening in the game, and whether this is something that they've added or something that they've just simply remade. Another conundrum, brain teaser, enigma, whatever word you want to use, happens right at the very end of this trailer, where Sephiroth states, "You do know that I killed her, so who exactly is she?" This, of course, having been overlaid over the footage of him essentially attacking Tifa shortly after she attacked him, of course for the events that happened at Nibelheim. The main question is, who exactly is Sephiroth talking to, and more importantly, who is he talking about? I think the whole idea of him attacking Tifa in this sequence with the dialogue over the top, I think has to be somewhat of a red herring. We know that Tifa survives this attack, of course. She was in the original Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that should say pretty much everything to even those who have not played the original FF7. Likely, I think he might be talking about you-know-who, who I know it's not really a spoiler at this point, but considering there are people who have only played Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's understandable that people don't want to be spoiled, but I do think that he's taken out you-know-who, and perhaps the party is still seeing this person somehow, that Sephiroth seems to notice through his powers of clairvoyance that he's miraculously gained throughout this entire remake series, and as such he's asking questions. And the last thing that I want to pick out from this trailer just so happens to be the boss fight in which Sephiroth appears. I'm assuming this has to be some form of Genova, considering that Sephiroth is talking about a being that sounds very much like Genova, but I can't quite pin down which version of Genova it's supposed to be. To me, it looks a lot like the synthesis version, particularly thanks to all of the hentai tentacles, but I don't think it is, considering that happens at the Northern Cave, which is almost at the tail end of Final Fantasy VII, which again calls into question just how far is Rebirth going to go in the Final Fantasy VII timeline. Do you think that they'll cut it short so they have enough to cover in the eventual third game, or do you think that we'll get the rest of Final Fantasy VII in this game, leaving the third game in the trilogy to be made up entirely of original ideas? Just something to mull over and think about as we move towards the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. All in all, I'm looking forward to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, having enjoyed my time with the remake, even if there were some things I would have changed, considering that game was more of a sequel than a remake overall. Let me know your thoughts on Rebirth and this trailer overall down in the comments below, particularly if you feel that there's something that I forgot to point out. And with all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.